We have very strong and independent Chapter 9 institutions. So there are no intentions of ever condoning impunity in this country, or ever looking the other way on issues human rights. Secondly, at the AU, we are at the forefront of strengthening of institutions of the African courts in Arusha.
Aldrin Sampe is our reporter, and he joins us here in studio to share more light on the saga. Aldrin, good afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us.
Good afternoon.
Aldrin, we're just talking just now. This must be such a confusing process for the people of South Africa, but where are we at now? What is the current process?
Well, the current process is that the notice has been sent to the United Nations. That's how the process works. You send the notice to the United Nations that you will be withdrawing from the ICC, and it takes over a year until the final, until it's brought to finality. And on that date, a year later, that's when South Africa will not become a member of the ICC anymore. That is only next year, mid-October. That's when South Africa will not be a member of the ICC. But throughout the next 12 months, South Africa will be participating and adhering, or expected to adhere to the rules and regulations that guide the ICC. While back home, it's a different story, because back home, remember that we have domesticated the Rome Statute, which means the reason that we had the two court rulings in the High Court as well as the Supreme Court of Appeal is because we had domesticated the Rome Statute. Now that law needs to be repealed in Parliament, and it has to be done through Parliament. And it would be interesting to find out exactly how they will do this, considering that, on the other hand, for instance, you have the DA that has taken government to court. You have this, they've taken government to the Constitutional Court, saying that the procedure of serving this notice on the ICC was procedurally wrong. And on the other hand, the Constitution expects the South African government to uphold human rights throughout the world and uplift human rights as well. So they feel that the South African government has failed on that by sending this notice to the United Nations.
But now, Aldrin, this is confusing because, as you heard in my previous story here, it seems that they've said that if the ICC does address South Africa's concerns, what does that mean? Does that mean then we're halfway in and halfway out?
Do you know, today we got an exclusive interview with the Minister of International Relations, Nkwana Mashabane, and I think for the first time that we actually get some sort of insight to exactly what concerns South Africa has with the ICC. The previous briefing led by Minister Masuta, the Justice Minister, didn't really give us that insight. All he could speak about was the conflict between the Immunities Act, which provides immunities to sitting heads of state, and they saying that that is in conflict. The ICC rules are in conflict with that rule here in South Africa. But now Nkwana Mashabane is saying that, first of all, there are cases, there are atrocities that happened in Afghanistan, for instance. Why aren't those people who are accused of those atrocities being dragged to the ICC? Case in point being the United States. But remember that the ICC has been arguing that, listen, the United States is not a member of the ICC, and for that reason we can't prosecute them. And Nkwana Mashabane is arguing, but listen, Sudan is also not a member of the ICC, yet you want to prosecute their president. And here's another thing. The United States might not be a member of the ICC, but the United States is part of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, which also refers cases to the ICC. This time around, even the Sudanese case was referred to the ICC by the Security Council. And remember that South Africa has been trying to push for reform of the security cluster. The way I read into this could be South Africa really pushing the hands of the United Nations, as well as the Assembly of State Parties, to say that, listen, the United Nations Security Council must be reformed, otherwise we will not participate in the ICC.
But now, Aldrin, is South Africa prepared to review its stance should the meeting with the ICC take place? That meeting is taking place next week, as I understand. It will be the prosecutor as well as the United Nations, our ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Majid. We'll have to wait and see what exactly happens there, because when I asked the minister, is this it? Is it final that South Africa is pulling out
of the ICC. She couldn't give me a finality, like this is it. It is clear that South Africa is pulling out and we're at a point of no return. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens after that meeting between the two. And in November, this is next month, later next month, the Assembly of Party States, the signatories to the ICC will also be meeting. South Africa will be part of that meeting. Yeah. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of that. And the chairperson of the APC has called on South Africa to relook. This is also the president of Senegal, who said that, listen, please relook at this decision that you've taken.
What do you make of Botswana's latest statement then?
Botswana is also one of those countries that has said that South Africa should relook this stance. They were quite harsh in that statement that they issued earlier on this week. And on the other hand, you have the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Botswana, Minister Vanson, who is also the AU Commission chairperson candidate. Remember that she's running for that position. And the interesting part about this is that, remember that in January, when the elections were taking place for the AU Commission chairperson, she was the candidate endorsed by SADC. And when I asked the Minister of International Relations, considering the stance of Vanson on how South Africa has responded to the ICC and pulling out, will South Africa rethink its support of Vanson as the new Commission chairperson of the ICC? Remember, even the AU has also, the new chairperson of the African Union. Remember that even the AU has said before that they have concerns with the way in which the ICC is going about prosecuting only South African, or rather only Africans.
You know, Aldrin, that brings me to my next point, because a lot of people don't realize that it was actually the AU's stance that, member states in Africa should be pulling out. I mean, we know for a fact that South Africa is the first country member to officially pull out. We know that Burundi and Kenya are still in the process.
Yeah, well, the AU's they wouldn't directly say that all African states should pull out. All African states should consider the role of the ICC, because remember that Africa also has what we call the African Court for Human Rights and People's Rights. That's the one that actually, with that court, which provides immunity to sitting heads of state. And the argument yesterday, for instance, I was speaking to the Minister of Defense, Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula, about this decision. And the question that she asked is that, imagine last year, if South Africa had arrested the commander-in-chief of Sudan, and remember that at the time South Africa still had troops in Sudan. Those troops have been pulled out now, but imagine what could have happened at that point. And this is a concern that has been raised by the ANC as well, and that's the reason why they took that decision at the ANC's NGC last year to say that let's start the process of pulling out of the ICC.
All right, now Aldrin, just sum everything up for us. You spoke to the minister. How soon is then cabinet to vote on this decision as to make it final?
I'm not too sure if Parliament has set down a date as yet, because this issue needs to be debated in Parliament. Minister Masuta has indicated that Parliament has that the cabinet has written to Parliament to come and explain before the Assembly why they've taken this decision, and then of course the process of repealing the law. But considering that you have the DA, which is taking this matter on review at the Constitutional Court, so it might take a while before the law, if at all, it will be repealed eventually here in South Africa. It might take a while before that actually happens.
But now this is very confusing, Aldrin, because we know that the intention to withdraw has already been sent to the United Nations, but the DA has a court case and cabinet still needs to decide. I mean, this is all confusing for everybody.
It's a long one, because now what you need to understand here is that you're dealing with two different laws. You have the Rome Statute that South Africa is a signatory to. Remember that when the ICC was founded, it was founded based on this document, and South Africa was part of those people that signed the document. And a question that I actually asked Minister Masuta when they made this announcement last week was that when South Africa decided to sign to the Rome Statute, do you think it was an oversight from cabinet at that point, because at that point we had already been signatories to what we call the Immunities Act, giving immunity to sitting heads of state. And he said that possibly it could have been an oversight. And that's the reason why now you have these two court rulings, the High Court as well as the Supreme Court of Appeal, that said that South Africa should have arrested Omar al-Bashir, and now you have a contempt of court case against government, essentially, because government failed to arrest Omar al-Bashir, and now they're not going to the Constitutional Court, because remember that before they were going to go to the Constitutional Court to appeal the Supreme Court of Appeal's ruling, they've decided not to go anymore because they believe that the matter is moot, considering that they're pulling out of the ICC.
But now pulling out, just to humor us, Aldrin, pulling out of the Rome Statute, what does it do to the country's international standings? I know Ban Ki-moon was citing his concerns about the fact that it could be a decline in South Africa's international standings.
Well, you look at what the human rights watchdogs have been saying, and they're saying that this is a bad decision coming from South Africa, which has been the champion of human rights. And in that interview and that clip that just played now as well from Nkwana Mashabane, who said that, listen, we have got Chapter 9 institutions which make sure that we adhere and uplift the human rights throughout the continent as well. South Africa is playing a huge role in terms of making sure that human rights are being adhered to and human rights are being uplifted. And that's why South Africa also supports the African Court of Human and People's Rights.
Yeah, all right. Well, Aldrin, thank you so much for that clarification. Aldrin St-Pierre, live to us here in studio. He was talking to us about South Africa's intentions to withdraw from the ICC.